Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you everybody for coming here on this gorgeous day. My name is Laura Esquivel. I'm the Vice President for Federal Policy and Advocacy for Hispanic Federation, and I want to welcome you to the launch of the Take Action for Puerto Rico campaign. My job is just to MC. The people you want to hear from are standing behind me. But I'd like to introduce Hispanic Federation's President and CEO, Frankie Miranda, to kick us off.
Thank you.
Hey, Frankie.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you everybody for being here. I want to thank Senators Gillibrand, Representative Velasquez, Soto, and Representative of Puerto Rico Governor Carmen Feliciano, and the President of the Puerto Rico House of Representatives, Rafael Hernandez, for also being here. I would also like to thank Aurelius Aponte, who came all the way from Puerto Rico to tell us her story, one that represents the stories of so many. We're here because we all recognize that Puerto Rico matters. U.S. citizens that live on the island of Puerto Rico matter. 4 years ago, Hurricane Maria, a Category 5, hit the island of Puerto Rico, causing thousands of deaths and billions of dollars in damage. Over 1 million people lost electricity in the longest blackout in American history. Some communities lack electricity up to 11 months, creating a situation that devastated the economy, resulted in thousands of deaths, and left many people homeless, jobless, without access to life-saving medical care, clean water, drinking water, and living under plastic. Today, 4 years later, losing power can be a daily occurrence. 4 years later, 18,000 people still under blue tarps. Hurricane Maria is the deadliest hurricane in modern American history. That is a fact. It is widely known that FEMA responded after Maria not very effectively, and that it was so much less than FEMA's effort in other states after similar disasters around that time and since. FEMA denied 79% of the applications for assistance from individuals from Maria, 79%. And we know that the Trump administration intentionally withheld recovery funds from for the island and put barriers to accessing that money for Puerto Rico that were not put in places for other communities following disasters. The federal government must address Puerto Rico's recovery in a holistic manner, ensuring equity and responding to Puerto Rico's unique realities, vulnerabilities, and legal framework. Thankfully, President Biden's administration started to lift these barriers, but there is still so much that we need to do. Our federal government has a moral and legal responsibility to help the people in Puerto Rico recover from this tragedy, just as it will help any other group of American citizens. The U.S. government continues to treat Puerto Ricans unequally with respect to federal benefits and programs like Medicaid and food stamps, SSI for the blind, disabled, and the elderly, and the child tax credit, among others. The lack of parity and discrimination in funding for federal benefit programs, especially those designated to alleviate poverty, have worsened the economy, social, and environmental vulnerabilities in the island. The courts have called this treatment unconstitutional. However, there is no disputing that this unequal treatment is one of the main causes of Puerto Rico's current crisis, economic crisis, and has contributed to the island's high poverty levels, which at 44% are higher than anywhere else in the country. What must Congress do? Pass comprehensive legislation that brings Puerto Rico into line with federal safety net programs. The Territorial Equity Act of 2021 will, among other important things, provide the territories with the same needed-based, open-ended Medicaid funding that is currently available to the 50 states and the District of Columbia. It will address Medicare disparities and provide the same level of nutrition support to low-income families on the island that low-income families in the island. Puerto Rican families deserve to eat nutritious food too. What the people speaking here today, we all believe, is that more needs to be done for Puerto Rico. We hope you will agree and join us in calling on Congress, the administration, and people across the country to take action for Puerto Rico. Thank you. And now,
Senator Schumer's here.
I would like to invite my friend, the Majority Leader, Senator Chuck Schumer. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Frankie. And let me thank Frankie, who I just learned last week, even though we've been friends for a long time. I said, how did you get the name Frankie? He said his father was Francisco. So, Frankie, thank you and the Hispanic Federation for the great job you do in New York and around the country. And I appreciate everybody being here today, including my colleague in the Senate, Senator Gillibrand, and our great La Luchadora, our great Congress member from New York, from Brooklyn, Queens, and Manhattan, the great Luchadora Velasquez. And first, I want to say a word about yesterday, about the news we received last night from the parliamentarian. Last night's ruling was extremely disappointing. It saddened me, it frustrated me, it angered me, because so many lives are at stake. But make no mistake, the fight continues. Senate Democrats have prepared alternative proposals. We'll be holding additional meetings with the parliamentarian in the coming days. I've worked very closely with my colleagues, including Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Senator Durbin, as well as our four Latino senators, Padilla, Menendez, Lujan, and Cortez Masto, and we're going to continue our fight with the best options available to provide immigrants with a chance of obtaining lawful residence. The last year and a half, if it showed anything, it's how vital immigrants are to America. So many were healthcare workers, food workers. During COVID, immigrants, documented and undocumented, risked their lives for to help others. And we are so proud of them, and they are so much part of America. And it is unfortunate that some in the political sphere have chosen to try and make immigrants scapegoats, spreading lies about them, spreading false information about them. The American people understand how important immigrants are. The path to citizenship has broad support in the American people. I think it's up to 68% right now. And the American people understand that fixing our broken immigration system is a moral imperative. It's also an economic imperative because immigrants are so important to our economy. Talk about shortage of workers. One of the main reasons is how Trump cut back on immigrants, both documented and undocumented. Immigration reform has been one of the most important causes of my time in the Senate. I will not stop fighting to achieve it. Now, for the reason we're here today, the anniversary of the brutal Hurricane Maria. It's hard to think that it has been 4 years since Maria made landfall on Puerto Rico and devastated the lives of so many of our fellow Americans who live on that beautiful island. This was one of the worst natural disasters in American history. Today, our thoughts are with the Puerto Rican families who lost a loved one in the aftermath of the storm. Hurricane Maria brought unimaginable pain and suffering to the people of Puerto Rico. Sadly, much of it is as a result of the deliberate delayed response of the Trump administration. It's 4 years later, and look at these pictures. Look at the blue roofs. Still, things haven't been fixed up. Look at those beautiful people in the pictures here, and then look, 4 years later. We would not tolerate that. We would not tolerate that anywhere in America, but we are doing that in Puerto Rico, and that is disgraceful and unfortunate. It is so shameful how long it took for disaster relief to come out the door. We fought day in, day out, along with Francisco. Oh, there he is.
Congressman Soto.
Yes. Can't see you in the mask.
Sure.
Thank you for being here,
You bet.
Congressman. And he does a great job in Florida. Frankie and I fought day in, day out, as did all of us here, to stop the Trump despicable discrimination against Puerto Rico. And finally, we got President Biden, we got Majority Leader Schumer, and of course Speaker Pelosi, and now the aid is flowing. We're working very, very hard. Everyone here knows that's the least we could do is get the aid that Puerto Rico is entitled to. These funds will currently rebuild homes and schools and hospitals. $10 billion for the power grid, which has been so destroyed and is hurting lack of power, hurting so many communities and hurting the economy. Now we will build it back bigger, better than ever, and resilient. So when, God forbid, the next storm occurs, we won't see the same destruction in that power grid. In order for Puerto Rico to be able to withstand the type of natural disasters, the island must have fair and equal access to resources, which Frankie outlined. Still so much discrimination. Do you know something we just corrected when we got power finally? Not electric power, political power. Do you know, this was so despicable, this was racist against the people of Puerto Rico, that only in Puerto Rico, when you had the child tax credit, only 3 children could get it. Everywhere else you could have 5 children, 7 children, 9 children, they'd all get it. Not Puerto Rico, we changed that, praise God. But it was outrageous, it was just racist. We also provided a record amount of education aid using Chapter 1 for education, K through 12 and higher for Puerto Rico in the ARP. So we have begun to make some corrections as to the discrimination against Puerto Rico for so long. But we have a lot more to do. If climate change is left unchecked, we know that Puerto Rico will suffer, so much so, maybe more than anywhere else in the United States. So we must invest in the resiliency of Puerto Rico. And that's why in the Build Back Better plan, Puerto Rico would receive the funding it needs to build more resilient roads and bridges and airports, to upgrade the energy grid even further and decentralize it. So if it goes down in one place, the whole island doesn't get in trouble. To put solar on the rooftops, to expand internet access so every Puerto Rican family can have access. When a child doesn't have internet access, it puts them behind educationally. When a family doesn't, it puts them behind in so many other ways. And here's a good thing, because La Luchadora and I worked on this. We pushed very hard and got in the upcoming reconciliation bill $80 billion for public housing. The number 1 place that will benefit is our home state of New York. But you know the number 2 place that will benefit, because it has the 2nd largest amount of public housing in the country? Puerto Rico. And so there are so many things that are in this bill, but getting a resilient grid and getting resiliency in all of our infrastructure investments is so important. And of course, we will try to do a better job at making sure the root cause of climate change is dealt with, which is our carbon emissions. So, we're working very hard to get renewable energy, clean transportation, clean buildings, low carbon industries, regenerative agriculture in the reconciliation bill, and every one of those things will greatly benefit the people of Puerto Rico if we can pass it. So I want to assure my friends here behind me and all the citizens, the great American citizens of the island of Puerto Rico, we are behind you. We have a lot of ground to make up, because for so many years, people on the other side of the aisle didn't want to pay attention to Puerto Rico. But now we are together. We have done some things, but our fight has just begun. We are going to make sure that Puerto Rico is treated equally in all the ways that Frankie outlined. So it's my honor to be here with all of you, to pledge my support for the fight, to wear this nice mask, and to now,
I'm going to thank you so much, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Majority Leader.
You're good. Leader, you're fine.
I would like to introduce the other great senator from the state of New York, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who has, like Senator Schumer, been a champion for not only the Puerto Ricans in the great state of New York, but also for Puerto Ricans on the island. Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you. So thank you all for being here. Thank you to the Majority Leader for his wisdom and leadership and dedication to this cause. I want to recognize Frankie Miranda for his leadership and everyone at the Hispanic Federation for never letting go of this issue and keeping it front and center where it needs to be. I also want to recognize our Congress delegation, extraordinary leaders who have always fought for Puerto Rico. My friend Chewie Velasquez, Darren Soto, and Chewie Garcia. Each one of them understands what's actually happening in Puerto Rico today and never loses sight of its urgency. And I want to especially recognize Nydia because not only has she taken me to Puerto Rico before, but she has made sure that I understand all of the issues that the families have suffered from the issues of Vieques to the issues of El Caño. She has kept me laser focused on the needs of Puerto Rico. I also want to recognize Carmen Feliciano, our Executive Director of the Puerto Rico Federal Affairs Administration, for being here and for leading this issue. I also want to recognize the woman who's going to share her story, Aurelius Aponte, for being willing to tell us what's going on and how it's affecting her. This Take Action for Puerto Rico campaign that the Hispanic Federation has launched unfortunately marks the 4th year anniversary of landfall of Hurricane Maria. And we remember the days and weeks thereafter and the massive destruction that that hurricane caused. 4 years ago, when Hurricane Maria barreled down on Puerto Rico, it left one of the most gruesome and heart-wrenching trails of destruction and devastation that I've ever seen. It was the deadliest national disaster the U.S. has seen in 100 years, taking nearly 3,000 lives. And it did $90 billion worth of damage, making it one of the costliest hurricanes ever in American history. When I toured Puerto Rico following the hurricane, I saw that damage firsthand, and it was stark, and it was deeply disturbing. We saw that there were thousands of families without water, without electricity, without the ability to protect and provide for their families. It was so heartbreaking to see that the response was needed, was so inadequate. 2 years later, we saw blue tarps on homes and buildings across the island. 4 years later, we still see an infrastructure that has never been properly rebuilt. And we still see in Vieques a community without a hospital. Shame on us. 4 years. The 9,000 residents of Vieques have not been able to get and access proper medical care. Imagine that being your mother, your grandmother, your sisters, your brothers, your children. It's untenable. The conditions have forced many families to leave Puerto Rico and have left those who still live there in even greater jeopardy from other disasters like earthquakes, droughts, and floods that have hit the island, as well as the COVID pandemic. Now, another hurricane season is underway, bringing more risk and more insecurity. As we invest in upgrading and modernizing our American infrastructure system, we have to make sure that we do it everywhere, in every community. That includes the archipelago of Puerto Rico. There are 3.3 million Americans on the island, and they need our help. That starts with ensuring that Puerto Rico's needs are included in the Build Back Better agenda and that our infrastructure investments meet the greatest need. We must help Puerto Rico upgrade their electric grid. That one investment alone will help rebuild communities, industries, and the economy. We have to do more to make sure that when we rebuild and repair not only the electric grid, but the roads and the bridges and the sewer systems, we make them more resilient and more sustainable so they can weather the damage from future storms. As weather grows increasingly more extreme, that resiliency and that sustainability could not be more important. We have been fighting for years to get the financial and technical support that the local government needs to continue the recovery, and there is no more time to waste. We need to get these resources moving. We need the recovery plans in motion, and that is how we'll create stability for Puerto Rican families. It must be a piece and a centerpiece of what we do in Build Back Better, and we will all keep fighting until it gets done.
Yes.
Wow. Did I tell you she was a champion or what? Thank you so much, Senator Gillibrand. I want to introduce next, we have a number of distinguished people here to speak who you will hear from, but we also thought it was important for you to hear from somebody from Puerto Rico who lived through Hurricane Maria, who continues to live 4 years later with the aftermath, and to really hear, this is not just about statistics. This is about real people. It is about their lives. It is about their families. So our next speaker is Aurelius Aponte from Puerto Rico, and I would like to us to all listen very carefully to her.
Thank you so much. May I take
Yes,
my mask
of
off?
course.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Aurelius Aponte, and I was born and live in Puerto Rico with my family. My husband, Jonathan Lopez, and I have 2 daughters. Annalise Lopez is 12 years old, and Isabella, my miracle baby. She's 4 years old. My youngest daughter, Isabella, was born on February 8 in 2017 with 7 major heart conditions. Her body was so fragile and her prospect uncertain. Doctors summarize it this way: an imperfection so perfectly designed that only God brought her alive. Of course, our whole lives were shaken because other than our faith in God, everything collapsed. Because of the surgical procedures and the almost 3 months Isabella stayed at hospital, I lost my job. The economy was bad, and my husband sometimes just made $10 a day as a taxi driver. After Isabella was allowed to come home, we were struggling. We were struggling to pay the bills, to take care of my other daughter, and to take care of my baby Isabella. Then, a few months later, Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico. No one was prepared. No one was prepared for Maria. Everything we had been trying to build up at least a little collapsed again. We were forced to flee to Florida, just like so many of our friends and neighbors that lost everything. A church in Florida helped us apply for help from FEMA. We were also told about other benefits for us and Isabella. We qualify for food stamps and living allowance and WIC. They also refer us to SSI. Everything was approved in 3 weeks. We were amazed at how fast these requests were processed in Florida. I felt like finally doors were opening in our favor again. Suddenly, my husband started to work. I did too. Everything was falling in place. We were settling in. Then, my 60-year-old mother was diagnosed with dementia and Alzheimer's disease, and we had to return to Puerto Rico. As soon as we returned to Puerto Rico, we lost many of the benefits we were eligible for while living in Florida. Isabella lost her SSI. Our food stamps and WIC dropped only because we moved to Puerto Rico. Because U.S. citizens like us living in Puerto Rico are not allowed to receive SSI. It stopped. We were struggling all over again, just because we live in Puerto Rico. Then, the COVID pandemic hit all of us. It's been one struggle after another, over and over again. In the middle of all this, there is Isabella, my daughter. She didn't ask for her heart disease, but she depends on us, her parents, to fight for her. God is in control, but I'm here today to fight for her. More procedures await. Actually, one of them will be on October 25th. in a few weeks. The next step is a heart transplant for Isabella. She needs me to care of her. I don't know how we are going to do it all. Knowing she had benefits to health like SSI that belong to her as a U.S. citizen, and then having it taken away is so unfair. My family works non-stop, but still it's not enough. It feels exhausting. Living in Puerto Rico, struggling to make ends meet, knowing what it's like living in Florida. It feels like we are being discriminated against as U.S. citizens with U.S. territory. Even though this is my story, my situation is very common. So many people in Puerto Rico, if they move to U.S., will be eligible for things that we can't get in Puerto Rico. It's not fair. I asked President Biden and the members of the Congress gathered here today to end discrimination against people like me and my daughter Isabella. End discrimination that keep families like ours from receiving those life-saving benefits only because we live in Puerto Rico. We need to help. We need the help, and my daughter deserves it. Thank you.
It's not just about policy, right? It's about lives, it's about children, it's about our fellow citizens. I want to introduce our next speaker, as Senator Schumer calls her, La Luchadora for Puerto Rico, Representative Chewie Velasquez, also coincidentally from the great state of New York.
Thank you, Laura, and Frankie, thank you so much for Hispanic Federation. The leadership and your commitment toward economic justice and social justice is just incomparable, and for the people of Puerto Rico. So, and Aurelius, what a moving story. You know, you made the case for the people of Puerto Rico. This is about fairness. You know, when Puerto Ricans go to war to fight in the armed forces, they're not asked if they are from Puerto Rico or they are from New York. They go, and they are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. And so here we are to remind Congress and the Joe administration, the President's Biden administration, that we need to resolve this type of issues. It is morally wrong.
Yes.
It is morally wrong to deny to Aurelius' daughter a fair chance to live. This is a matter of life and death. And so Maria cost close to 3,500,000 lives, 3,000 and change. But we cannot forget the fact that Puerto Rico was facing a fiscal crisis before Maria struck. And with that, we found a power grid and an infrastructure that didn't have a chance to sustain a Category 5 hurricane. So telecommunications were destroyed, the electrical grid collapsed, and the rest is history. We are here this afternoon to pay tribute to the lives lost. More than 3,000 perished, not only because of a natural disaster, but also as a direct result of political mismanagement by the Trump administration. As many in Puerto Rico now correctly underscore, the post-disaster was political.
Yes.
Hurricane Maria left $90 billion in damages, and the federal government has allocated close to $72 billion towards rebuilding. And you see the pictures here. thousands of houses with blue tar. That is happening in America. And I can assure you that if we have this same situation in New York or in Connecticut, people will be taken to the street, into the streets, and that will not be acceptable. So, but then I also have a message to the Biden administration, and in particular to FEMA. FEMA, you got to do better than what you're doing today. Yesterday, the excuse was Donald Trump, but today you are sitting in that agency, and you got to do better to help the local government expedite all the projects that have been approved. And 4 years later, they're still dealing with the bureaucracy. And I also have a message to the administration in Puerto Rico. We need to put an end to the crisis that we have seen in terms of public administration. We cannot be paralyzed. We need to execute so that we are better prepared to sustain another hurricane. If a hurricane today, Category 1, hits the island, it will not survive. The power grid will not survive. The power grid continues to be fragile, and a recent privatization of PREPA has proven to be a failure. Puerto Ricans are experiencing blackouts almost daily, and every single one of those blackouts takes them back to that unforgettable dawn of September 20, 2017. Now, 4 years later, I have been proud to lead the fight for an equitable federal recovery effort. And I am just so proud of Leader Schumer, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, the delegation that is here, Congressman Soto, Chewie Garcia, Luis Gutierrez is no longer here, but we got Chewie Garcia that we have accepted as Puerto Rican. So thank you very much, and God bless the Puerto Rican people.
Thank you so much, Representative Velasquez. I'm just going to go ahead and introduce the next speaker, who she just mentioned, Representative Chewie Velasquez. Not a consolation prize, a terrific representative and fighter for, Chewie Garcia. Sorry, Chewie Garcia from Illinois.
I will
Congressman.
not complain.
Thank you. As you can see, I am a part of the family. Being called Chewie Velasquez is living proof. But I am very happy to stand with my Boricua sisters and brothers commemorating one of the most tragic events to afflict the people of Puerto Rico. And today we remember all of the lives that were lost, all of the lives that were affected and continue to be affected by that devastation. And that's why I'm proud to join with the Hispanic Federation to relaunch Take Action for Puerto Rico. I'm representing my constituents of Puerto Rican descent in my district in Illinois. It is a thriving and fighting community that wants to see justice done for the people in Puerto Rico. And I've heard stories from my constituents in Humboldt Park and other parts of my district about being unable to reach their loved ones. Most of us still remember the heartbreaking news of people losing their homes and stories of those who died from asthma attacks simply because they could not get to a breathing machine. Some communities remained without power for nearly a year. I visited those localities and those municipalities and towns. And all of this at the hands of a racist administration that deliberately delayed relief. It was unconscionable. It was the neglect and the indifference that killed Puerto Ricans after Maria. The tragedy exposed the second-class citizenship Puerto Ricans experience and the long-standing inequities they continue to face. But Hurricane Maria also demonstrated resiliency of Puerto Rico and how communities came together. We saw community members and local leaders look out for one another and step in where the government failed to help. The people of Puerto Rico have suffered for far too long. They've experienced devastating hurricanes, earthquakes, the debt crisis, and an inadequate federal bureaucracy, all on top of COVID-19. And the reality is that with climate change, they'll likely experience stronger and even more devastating hurricanes. We cannot allow the government to turn its back on Puerto Rico ever again. We have a historic opportunity to build back better, but Puerto Rico must be included. So thank you, Frankie, Miranda, and the Hispanic Federation for all the work that you do to ensure that Puerto Riqueños and Puerto Riqueñas on the island have the resources necessary to rebuild, survive, and to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressman Garcia. It's really important to have voices like yours because people need to realize you do not have to be Puerto Rican to care about what happens to our fellow citizens in Puerto Rico. But the next speaker happens to be Puerto Rican. So Congressman Darren Soto from the great state of Florida, also a tremendous champion, goes without saying. I will let you speak now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, First Hispanic Federation, and the great work you're doing. To Aurelius Aponte, thank you for that incredible story. To Senator Schumer, Gillibrand, our amazing members of Congress like Velasquez, Garcia, Speaker, thanks for being here, as well as members of the governor's office and the legislature. The 4-year remembrance of Hurricane Maria brings back a lot of painful memories for so many of us here and on the island, as we mourn the deaths of nearly 3,000 Puerto Ricans, the deadliest natural disaster in modern history. Thousands struggled with food, shelter, and medicine. I saw it firsthand, arriving just about 3 days after Hurricane Maria hit the island, and thousands more left without power. You heard, for up to 11 months. If that happened in a New York or a Florida or an Illinois, our constituents would never stand for it. Congress passed billions in relief, but because of a vendetta by former President Trump, so little of that money had arrived over the last 3 years. And as a territory without proper representation, without voting members of Congress and the Senate, they were nearly powerless to stop them. They relied on allies like those here today to help. In Central Florida, thousands came. We heard the story of the Aponte family. Housing, healthcare, food assistance, jobs. Our office, faith leaders, Hispanic Federation, and so many other groups helped out with stories just like the Aurelius Aponte family. Many stayed, and it's a direct relation of why I represent the fastest growing district in the nation. We had 40% growth. We mourn. We lament this great relocation, even as we welcome everyone. And we know our responsibility in Central Florida to stand with our brothers and sisters on the island to help you all return to prosperity. And we have a new champion in President Joe Biden. We've seen funds finally released April 19th of this year. HUD obligates $8.2 billion in CDBG mitigation funds for Puerto Rico. Just recently after that, HUD removed restrictions on an additional $4.9 billion CDBG funds. And that was the game, right? We allocated all this money, and then they'd have application after redundancy, and made Puerto Rico chase their tail. That's how the Trump administration did it. We're cutting that red tape. We're getting the relief directly to the people. We also saw June 21st of this year, HUD published in the Federal Register the use of $2 billion in CDBG funds for the electrical grid. This is key to help rebuild the electrical grid and boost the renewable energy that the governor and the Puerto Rico legislature has pushed for to have carbon net neutral by 2050. And as of January 2021, we've allocated around $42.5 billion. Medicaid Equality, another huge issue. Our bill, the bipartisan H.R. 4406, supporting Medicaid in the U.S. Territories Act, passed unanimously out of committee. You have huge champions here. It means $3 billion a year for nearly 5 years, and we're going to do our best to get the best deal possible, and we appreciate the support of the Energy and Commerce Committee. But we have to mention the other great work done. The American Rescue Plan finally treated Puerto Rico equally. According to many analysts, Puerto Rico received nearly $20 billion under the American Rescue Plan to help them get shots in arms, money in pockets, and to finally fix things like the child tax credit. But we have to finish the job. And that's where the Build Back Better plan is so critical. This is the moment to finally right the wrongs of so many inequalities in these programs, and I look forward to working with Hispanic Federation, with our great senators, with our members of Congress, and our dignitaries from Puerto Rico to get this done. The time for action is now. Thank you, everyone.
Gracias. Gracias.
The time for action is now. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who is here representing the government of Puerto Rico and Governor Pierluisi of Puerto Rico, Carmen Feliciano, the Executive Director of the Puerto Rico Federal Affairs Administration. And my friend, Carmen, please come.
I want to mention a little bit of silver lining for Hurricane Maria, and I don't want to take much of your time, but I have to say that Laura Esquivel is one of the silver linings that came with the hurricane. I met her, and I have known the Hispanic Federation for years. The work they've been doing on the island, it's incredible, and I'm thankful to Hispanic Federation and to all the champions you've been hearing here today. Puerto Rico, as you all know, has been confronting a lot of challenges that began with the fiscal crisis. And as we were going through the process of handling the fiscal crisis and dealing with the Fiscal Control Board, we were hit by Hurricane Maria, Hurricane Irma, and now with the COVID pandemic. It's been a time of challenge for the island. It's a time to get together, but it has shown our resiliency. I'm originally from Puerto Rico. My family is still there, and I know the frustrations that they've been going through in the past years. Yet, I'm working in the Governor Pierluisi's administration, and I feel the sense of optimism and desire to really begin the reconstruction and recovery of Puerto Rico that for too long was stalled, like Congresswoman Velasquez mentioned and Darren Soto. We were beginning to get the fund thanks to the great job they were doing in Congress, then to see that the administration, by basis of racism and not wanting to really help the island, put a stop to the funding and to the flowing of the funds that we are now beginning to receive. Most of the recovery that's been done in Puerto Rico so far was emergency with the emergency funds, and we expect to begin seeing permanent work in the months to come. The governor is very focused on it. He's having continuous meetings with the heads of agencies that are managing these funds to make sure that they're managing correctly, that we're complying with all regulations, and that we're being effective and beginning the reconstruction of Puerto Rico. Among those recoveries, one of the most important areas that we know and we all know is the energy grid and the problem that we have with infrastructure and critical infrastructure on the island. So the governor has been focused on the energy grid, like it was mentioned. I don't agree with Congresswoman Velasquez, who I love dearly, that this has been a mess. What we're seeing right now, it's the pain of a transition. Luma Energy is an expert in the area of transformation and distribution, and that's the area that they're being assigned to work with, and PREPA continue to work with generation. We are seeing the challenges of a system that was completely broken and that we now need to sort of rebuild from the bottom up. And I'm certain and confident that this administration will be able to do just that, and that we are going to have the energy and the services that we as Puerto Ricans deserve on the island. We're also, one priority project is water safety. We're working with the Puerto Rico Water Agency, PRASA, to make sure that all Puerto Ricans have access to safe water and facilities, and that all our people also receive what they deserve. Sadly, most of the infrastructure in Puerto Rico before the hurricane, due to the economical and fiscal conditions, was not ready for such a hit. Yet, I've always said that when you're here and we have a thunderstorm, a simple thunderstorm, let's say here in Arlington County, we lose power. What Puerto Rico was hit on September 20th, 4 years ago, was something that we've never seen before, and that none of us has suffered through. And people in Puerto Rico still reminiscent, and today is an important day where they still feel nervous about all the little storms that we're seeing that they're forming in the Caribbean and heading our way. Like I said, silver lining, The people here in the States finally, once and for all, understood that Puerto Rico is part of the United States, that we are U.S. citizens, that we fought hard, that we've lost lives fighting for democracy, for values, that for power and democratic values that we don't have as Puerto Ricans. Yet we've been there hand in hand, and that's what we expect for this administration. We're not asking for receive anything that we haven't fought for. We're here. We have contributed greatly to the nation, and in all these years that we've been part of the United States since 1998, and we're just and simply asking for what we deserve. Right now, we're fighting together in Congress to get equal treatment on Medicaid funding. It is very undemocratic and incredible that in the 2021, you have 3.2 million citizens of the United States that don't have adequate access to healthcare services. That is not what this nation is made for. That is not what the members in Congress that are working in their offices right now stand for. And I'm sure that we're going to see during this process and under the Biden-Harris administration, better treatment for Puerto Rico in Medicaid, access to SSI, better food services and nutrition services, and that what we're asking for. As far as the recovery funds, we continue to work hard to make sure that we use them properly and that Puerto Rico feels the recovery and the people are no longer frustrated, that our roads are to par with the roads of our sisters and brothers in the States. And we thank you for everything that you've done for Puerto Rico, for putting the message out there, and to continue to fight with us and walk in the halls of Congress asking for what Puerto Rico deserves. So thank you very much to all of you for everything you've done for Puerto Rico.
Gracias, Carmen. One last speaker. One of the things the Take Action for Puerto Rico campaign exemplifies is that so many of us are willing to work across lines, across parties, across ideologies, because we all care about the people of Puerto Rico, and we care just about basic justice and human rights. So I want to introduce our last speaker, the President of the Puerto Rico House of Representatives, Rafael Tatito Hernandez, to close us out, and then we'll take questions.
Thank you. First, I want to establish that we're here as a one Puerto Rico. Unite in an effort of working together for the people with needs in the island. We have the private sector over here, the Chamber of Commerce of Puerto Rico, the CPA Association, the Senate represented by our CPA, Juan Zaragoza, the House of Representatives, and we are working with the Governor, Pedro Pierluisi. So first, I want to thank Miranda and Hispanic Federation to keep the light of hope burning for all the peoples of Puerto Rico. And that is something that I really live, because I was the one who distributed through all my district solar lamps in a way that people have at least the light to somebody's gonna come for help to help them later on. So people got the hope, and you help us. Thank you for that. Secondly, we need to thank our champions. Congresswoman Velasquez, Chuck Schumer, Chewie Garcia, Darren Soto. All those heroes of Puerto Rico have been helping us allocate resources for us. But what we need is execution. We have the resources already in place. What we need an administration, the Biden administration, to do contrast with the Trump administration. We need the resources building houses, building roads, giving services, rebuilding the health system. Right now, how are we gonna work if we don't have the certainty if there is a power enough to the work area to be on? When we finish working, we don't know. We are not sure that we're gonna have power in our facilities in our home. We are not sure that our school will have power to continue with our services and keep the education in the island. Our hospitals, we have changed the complete system of grid in the way that keep working without power. So it's a completely change of mentality. The only way that we're going to keep losing population to move from Puerto Rico to the United States is to have certainty in the resources and have economic growth and opportunities to compete in the markets. So we're here unite to ask for action for the executive branch and the legislature to give us the SSI, the resources for Medicaid, the resources to economic growth, to big work as we have done for decades as American citizens. Thank you.
That concludes our scheduled speakers. At this time, we are able to take a few questions. Do we have any questions? Well, if not, our speakers are also available for interviews afterwards. We will be sending to all of you links to our comprehensive policy positions, our solutions from both Congress and the Biden administration. And we appreciate you all coming here today very much to help us make sure that the country remembers Puerto Ricans are Americans. Puerto Ricans deserve what we're asking for, and that we are here today to take action for Puerto Rico. So thank you very much, all of you, for coming out today.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias. Thank you so much. That was terrific. Gracias. Thank you for coming.